Welcome to RevOps Revolution, where we focus on changing the game for driving revenue. I'm your host, Jesse Morris, and each episode we take a look at the different areas that affect change and drive revenue across your organization. If this is your first time joining us, please subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Here's the revolution. Welcome to another day of the revolution. I am your host, Jesse Morris. And today I am super excited to have one of my friends, colleagues, former bosses, leaders, Sue Holub on the line. Thanks for joining the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jesse. Good to be with you.
It's fun. I'm excited. It's pretty cool. I think like when you and I started working together, that was about three years ago, something like that.
I think it is about 3 now, yeah.
And I'm going to go a little bit off of where we started, but like it is funny to look back. You and I even talked about this a little bit earlier of like we started in this journey of kind of a little bit of a rocky start, not with you and I, but just like how you became my leader and that whole transition. And I think about how you handled that situation. And it's like, as somebody who really respects certain leaders, it's very rare you come across good leaders. You're one of those few people in my life that I'm like, man, I really admire the way you lead. And I think a lot about that time. We can talk about that here in a little bit. But anyways, Sue has been leading as an executive in the SaaS space for years now. Like I think one of the cool things that stood out to me a lot was, I mean, our last thing we worked together on was kind of a mess, especially at the beginning, and your ability to get in the trenches with your team. Like I never questioned with you of like, you know, are you working hard and is it just you giving me stuff and you're kind of sitting in the back, you know, just chowing down on food or watching TV or something. Not that we ever had any other executives do that, but you know, that always stood out. And then I think too, the other thing was like your ability to get a bunch of people all rowing in the same direction, just super admirable. So anyway, super excited to have you. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, fill a little bit more of the gaps of things I didn't cover?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you and I have a lot of water under that bridge and a lot of rowing we did. I'm like you said, it's great to be here. I'm a C-suite executive. I specialize in transforming and scaling B2B tech and software businesses. I'm not really a startup person. I'm more of a it's time to level it up person. And so I've led organizations through organic growth, inorganic growth. And where we worked, our last stop together was my third successful exit. So I was the chief growth officer there. I had all commercial and go-to-market responsibility, which is how you and I were working together. And most recently, I did a consulting gig for a carve-out, a PE-backed carve-out that's now a standalone company, and I am pursuing a CEO role in the B2B tech space.
That's exciting. And I think back over our journey, and I think, you know, one of the things that people don't always see is ultimately like the consistency of a person. I had a leader early on a lot in my career. He talked about everything's a data point with people, right? And he was like, you know, if you have a bad day, we all have bad days, you know, it's a data point. If you have a bad day every week for 10 weeks, that's a trend line. And I think a lot about with you, the thing that stood out to me was you were always consistent, you know, like not to say you never had bad days, but there was this consistency, and that set really the tone and tenor, I think, for the rest of us, especially in the environment we were playing in, which is really interesting. I think as you talk about, you know, this next step for you, and you and I have talked about this for a long time, the CEO role. I mean, that just aligns so well to your capabilities because you always, even in your, you know, chief growth role, which I think is we're going to talk about that today, is like one of my favorite roles, and it's the first time I'd experienced it. You were looking across the whole business already. And so for now, you know, I think this is just your obvious next transition within this journey. So excited for you.
Thank you. The idea that, people talk about the silos and breaking down the silos. That is circa, 20 years ago already. As you move up in leadership, if you're not looking, kind of down across and over the horizon, not only will you not grow and evolve, but certainly whatever's under your leadership won't. And so it just requires working a lot more holistically across the organization. And that's where this concept of chief growth officer, some people might call it revenue, some people might call it sales, but I call it growth because that's actually the destination. That's the outcome I'm going for. Revenue to me is, a little bit more specific, and sales is almost too specific, right? Because it leaves out the functions of marketing and channel and alliance and revenue operations and implementations and things like that. So you've got a lot more goes into the top line than a lot of people think about. And I think they just kind of stop at sales. But it takes a lot of tailwind to get to those sales. So that was kind of the method to the madness of that role.
Well, and within that, I mean, you've had 3 successful exit now, which congratulations on the 3rd one.
Thank you.
Like, you've spent a large part of your career here in the go-to-market side of things. I mean, I'd love your thoughts a little bit on these fundamentals, because I think that's kind of what you were hinting at just now. Talk a little bit about what you think some of those are to like being critical to running the organization going forward.
It's interesting. I am one of those folks that views go to market very clearly, but to most people, it's very unsexy because I am a foundations back to the basics girl. I think once you get your foundation set, it's kind of like, the rebar. You're driving down the highway, you see those guys, they're building a building and they've dug the big hole and they seem down there forever. And then once they get that rebar in, it seems like the building goes up overnight. And I feel like go-to-market motions are somewhat similar in that analogy. First, you have to focus on data integrity and have the appropriate systems in place. And that's a slippery slope because you want to get that data right. It's not just having data, it's the integrity of the data. Is it accurate data? Is it duplicative data? And you'll never have perfect data. You and I have talked about that to a blue in the face, but it's got to be pretty good because it's informing your decisions in so many aspects of the business. You want to automate things, but that's also tricky in go to market. You don't want to overdo it. If you think about marketing, you think about sales and all the technologies we get marketed to us to buy. At some point, your salespeople, especially your account managers or your new business reps, it's just too much tech. They're not going to use it, and it's going to overwhelm them, and then you've wasted the purchase. And then it's the idea of automating where you can, but don't overdo it. If you can automate a process to render reporting or to absorb the actions of salespeople or something like that, that's great. But sometimes you can't lose the human connection to make sure that the people are doing what they're supposed to do. So that's kind of the first one. Is I'm big on the data piece. The second one is defining what good looks like. And you and I have also talked about that extensively. I think one of the things I've learned in certainly my most recent stop is the assumption that when somebody's in a role or a level of leadership, I'm assuming they've done the same, agile learning and voracious learning that I do, that you do. And they haven't necessarily done that, or they haven't been exposed to good leaders who've trained them and shown them what good looks like. So you think they know, but they don't really know. And so you can't assume everyone's been exposed to best practices or selling methodologies or anything else. So that was one kind of aha I had, is making sure they've got the training and enablement to do whatever it is you want them to do, however you want them to do it. Establish what good looks like. The second is inspect what you expect, trust but verify. And that was where RevOps was the star of the show for me. Revenue operations is essential in the inspect what you expect or trust but verify, because you're always going to get different stories. And you can't rely on data exclusively. There's always a human component to what's going on. But the reality is, without it, without regular readouts and reporting and the analytics, you just won't really know what the truth is of what's happening at the segment level, at the rep level, at the account level, et cetera. And then, for me, leading by example. So you were gracious in your comments, but it's get out there. Get out from behind the desk, go on calls and visits with reps or account managers. You got to be clear and firm, but supportive with them. I need you to do this. I need you to put your stuff in Salesforce, things like that. But at the same time, they're going to hit roadblocks. We all do. And so you want to support them and brainstorm with them and solution with them, be part of that solution versus the tyrant that sits behind the desk. And so for me, that was kind of number 2. And then number 3 is enable, empower, get out of the way. If you've hired the right people and you've given them that enablement, you've showed them what good looks like, you're as long as you're aligned on what good looks like and what the outcome is, turn them loose. You have to trust them. You have to know that they're trying to do their best and assume that until they lose that trust from you. And then on the people front, hire fast, promote faster, and hire fast, fire faster, and promote fastest. I think people leave people in too long. They're too long to hire new people, and sometimes you get folks like yourself who you could just see were rising stars. That would be a force multiplier for what we're trying to do, and give those people the remit and the authority and the autonomy to get that done for the business.
I want to double click on a few things as I think you hit on, there's some big nuggets in there. And it's funny because even the inspect what you expect, the number of times I say that now is pretty funny, and it all comes from you. So, but I think there's a couple of things I think are really relevant that I just want to take a second on. Number one, define what good looks like. You talk about foundations, and it's funny because I don't think as leaders and I've been even thinking about it, like after you said that today, I'm like, man, when was the last time that I do that? Sometimes I oftentimes reward, but like, have I recently, especially like I've got a lot, I mean, I've hired 21 people in the last 12 months, and it's like, even
It's a
I
lot.
did it 6 months ago. It's weirdly enough too long at the rate we're hiring, right? And it's like I need to think about just taking that step back and doing that. But to your point, if you hire good people and you define that really clearly and you reinforce it, I mean, where you did fit, I think a great job in leading me and in particular, and also the rest of us, like that empower piece. And it wasn't this, you know, Sue's, I'm a monkey on a string or whatever. Like it was very much like, Jesse, you know what you're doing. I'm here to support. You know what good looks like. You know what I expect. But ultimately, you go do. And I think that's something that it's hard sometimes as those of us, and I think you're the same way, where we have high expectations. Sometimes it is hard to let go, but also it's an acknowledgement, a head nod towards we have to in order to actually grow at the rate we need. It's almost like getting out of our own way, which is exactly what you said, right? Get out of the way.
Yeah, it's why for me people is the top priority. If you get your people right, and you've heard me, beat this drum. If you get your people right, so I start with like purpose, problem, people, product, process. But in the operation, if you get your people right and your product right and your processes right, you'll get everything else right. Just by pure definition, you will. But if you've got the wrong people, it won't matter the alignment, the autonomy, whatever you give them, the resources, they're not going to get it done. Or they're not going to get it done collaboratively or thoughtfully. They'll leave out a part of the business or they'll overlook something critical. And so for me, it's about hiring people I trust that are competent, that are capable, that are confident in themselves, but that also want to grow as a team, right? And so I had that, of course, in you for certain, and our peer group, as part of my direct reports, and it was about that alignment that I touched on. Everybody knew what good looked like. Everybody knew that we were working as a team and what we were responsible to deliver for the business. But if I'm hiring you and telling you how to do it, then shame on me, right? Then either I didn't make the right hire or I'm micromanaging. Because the idea is, a little bit that Ted Turner. If you've, heard Ted Turner, the best thing he was good at was surrounding himself with people smarter than him. I want to be that person as well, right? I don't want to be the smartest person in the room, but I want to orchestrate and conduct that orchestra of very smart people to achieve a common outcome. And that's what you and your colleagues did beautifully.
Well, and I think that leads me to another big thing, which kind of circles us back to the chief growth officer role. One of the big things that I think, A, your vision for the role, and B, how you led that was game changing. I think this is where like most SaaS companies weirdly go wrong. And it's tension. And I like as we've talked about this in the past, like tension isn't always a bad thing, but I'd love for you to
Mhm.
expand a little bit, like when we talk chief growth officer, I think we should define that because I don't think
Yes.
everybody knows what that means, and I think that's really important because that is a very big differentiation for most SaaS companies out there. Because most of them are running kind of, you got your CRO, you got your
Mhm.
CMO, and then you might even have some other CS leader as well over here, and maybe RevOps is sitting under finance, or pieces of RevOps doesn't even
Yeah.
exist, right? So can you talk a little bit about A, the vision you have, and B, like how you've run that? Because I think that is a really big thing. And I think C, lastly, then the impacts that we had in particular, because I mean, I've never seen, I'm not gonna lie, like I've never seen at my level having peers that all felt like we were all rowing at the same pace in the same direction. And it was never this question of like, well, what is their other intent? We were all aligned. It was just full alignment. It was like literally the boys in the boat, that movie that was came out, like everybody was just rowing. And that only happens, I think, really from you leading down. It's like you're the coxswain ultimately, right? In that analogy. But
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about that and just the vision and how that works?
Sure. Well, there was a lot in there. So let's
There
start
was,
with
yeah.
Chief Growth Officer. So the reason I came up with that role was because so we were consolidating responsibility at the organization, and ultimately what we did was we took all operational functions and we rolled them up under myself as the chief growth officer, and then my peer is the chief kind of operating officer, technology officer. And so what he and I wanted to do together was kind of have a front of house, back of house relationship. And by doing that, it allowed us both to be accountable to the organization, to each other, and to obviously our customers and partners. But it also allowed kind of singularity in those functions that rolled up to both of us. Because I think in some organizations you have so many C-suite people that it gets really fragmented. And the challenge with that fragmentation is accountability. Each person's somewhat pointing at somebody else. So touching on your sales and marketing concept, it's more than sales and marketing that makes a top line grow. And that was kind of my point of using the term growth. I wanted people internally, and I wanted our customers and our partners and our prospects to understand that we are about growth, not just for our company, but for you as our customer or partner. Your success, your growth is equally important to us. That's how we're measuring our outcome and our success with you. If I call it sales, well, then you're just a transaction. You're not a relationship. And especially in areas like federal government or Fortune 500 enterprise, it's all about the relationship. They want to know they're not a transaction. And so that was the method to the madness of that. The second was to consolidate somewhat end to end the front of house experience under one C suite leader. So you have from kind of customer acquisition or surfacing of that prospect, so that's marketing, all the way through new business, then through account management, then or alliances and channels, depending if it's a customer or partner. Then you have implementation of the software, and underlying all of that is what I called Switzerland, which was revenue operations, which is what you helped me build. And the reason for that is in many organizations, finance is supposed to be Switzerland. And I'm not disagreeing with that. But the type of information that we look at in the go to market motion, if you will, is A, so specific, and B, so granular that you really need to be focusing on it all day, every day, but you can't have a dog in the hunt. So if I'm asking a sales leader something and they're, let's say, coming up short on their number, they're going to be inclined to tell me it's a pricing problem, it's a product problem, it's a marketing problem, it's any other, it's a market problem, it's any other problem but them. And each function would tend to do that. I'm not saying people always do that. I'm just saying humanity, that's the tendency. And so what RevOps does is it serves as Switzerland. It's kind of the tide that helps all those other teams rise. And it's always looking at the metrics, but not just to be a report card, but to derive the insights. What's the actionable insight that comes out of this information? It could be we have a performance issue in a certain individual or team. It could be we have an enablement and training issue. It could be we have a pricing problem. It could be we have a product deficiency. But you won't know unless you have somebody whose job it is to be that fluent in that end-to-end motion, go-to-market motion, and have the knowledge, the skills, the experience to set up processes and systems to surface that. And that is a massive strategic advantage to me as a leader. So I'll pause there and see if there's anywhere you want to go with that.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And what I like about how you painted that, one of the things you said, which sticks out to me, is it was not just about growth for us as a company, but also for our customers. And I think that's something you spent a lot of time on was around, not just. I think a lot of people focus on new business. Nothing wrong with that. Obviously, that's a big piece of it. But I think you really got into the trenches and the details, in partnership with one of our good colleagues to get to the bottom of that. Can you talk a little bit? I want to go a little bit more in depth actually on that side of the business. How do you feel like you were able to kind of transition the organization and just in general, like what are some of those foundational pieces that can really help the customer side feel like not a transaction and actually feel like we are supporting their growth?
It's a great question. One of the learnings I had from my last organization was I think we went at the royal we went at new business a little too aggressively coming out of COVID. And what happened was we did not necessarily have our foundation where we needed it in current customers. And so, new businesses, you get enamored with it, right? It's exciting. And especially in a private equity backed asset, everybody wants to see that new growth. But that only comes if you've got a solid, stable foundation first. If you're losing customers, kind of out the bottom of the proverbial funnel, you're never going to replace them fast enough at the top. And so, taking it back to your question, one of the things I knew I had to do is get out from behind the desk, get in front of those customers for two reasons. One, and partners. One, I wanted the team to see that I was in the canoe with them. To your point about being the coxswain or what have you. And some days, if I needed to, I'd grab an oar and I'll row with you. We have an escalation or we have a contract issue or something like that. I wanted people feeling like they had a leader that led from the front, that they weren't just, in the ivory tower and they're so far away and go handle it yourself and I'll read about it on a report. The second piece is I needed our customers to feel that. I needed our customers and partners to see that I personally cared and the executives I brought with me personally cared about this outcome for them and their organization. Our technology was considered a very critical technology for what our customers purchased. As critical event management was a space, and so it's also used in emergencies and high risk situations, and so it's not taken lightly. So I wanted them to see that we cared, not just about the contract, but about them and their teams and how they got a gold star internally and how this technology performed to keep their operations and people safe. And the best way to do that is to be human, face to face. And so I spent a lot of time on the road, getting to know our teams in the different locations here and abroad, as well as getting in front of a lot of our customers so that they heard from me personally, or some of them even had my mobile number and would text or call me directly. But I'm okay with that. I'll always get the account manager involved. I think that's a mistake when people don't. But they need to know I'm a real person and we genuinely care about their business. And I always found, by the way, that wasn't abused. People didn't, blow up my cell phone for the sake of having it when, a raindrop fell. But on a dark sky day versus a blue sky day, they were able to reach out and we were able to get them the help they needed. So for me, it's just about leading from that front and making sure my teams knew that I was engaged and switched on and in the detail with them without micromanaging it, as well as the people that we sell with and sell to.
Love it. And when you look at the framework, I'm going to bring this back up a little bit. When we think about how, you and the kind of CTO, COO delineation of duties, there's two kind of, I'm going to generalize leadership principles here. And, you've got the leader that kind of dictates and go do, and then you've got the leader that really is all about building consensus, driving to the why. Here's why we're doing this. Now let's go again, getting people to run this. And I think one of the things you do really well is consensus building. I remember I was thinking about this the other day, actually, about how when we first wanted to pitch revenue operations, like I remember that took us maybe a month and a half to get that bill through Congress. I think it was a thing you'd always say, and the coaching you gave me along the way of like, hey, here's how you can actually make this thing a lot easier when we actually get to the vote, for lack of a better analogy. You gave a lot of foundations. Can you talk a little bit about like what you feel like some of those principles are to really, and why you focus? Because again, you were the chief growth officer. You could have just said, here's what we're doing, go do. Or which is faster in the short term and potentially longer, a lot more detrimental in the long term. Can you talk a little bit about like why you approach it that way and what your approach really looks like?
Yeah, it's so you used one of my phrases, right? Getting a bill through Congress, because it is a lot like that. In an organization, when you're standing up a whole function, it's unlikely that you're just going to wave your wand and do it. Now, maybe in the Fortune fives and things like that, but in organizations that are smaller than that, or private equity backed, hundreds of millions, but not hundreds of billions, if you will, or dozens of billions. You're going to have to go through at least a peer review at the executive level of, I think we need to create a function that does this, right? What is it is, does, means. And here's what I think, year one of resourcing it looks like. That's expense that has to come from somewhere. And so you have to justify it and take people on that journey. So it's a challenge because it's kind of one of those, you're right, it's the right thing to do for the business, but you can't just sit there and declare I'm right, so we're doing it. You have to take people on that storyline, and that's what we were able to do together. And you obviously built a very compelling case, and we were able to stand that up. But it gets back to the concept of how do you get alignment? How do you drive alignment on anything? And it's challenging because it assumes that everyone you're engaging with has the same agenda as you, right? Whether that's a company agenda or an individual agenda, or you're trying to stand up a function, and let's say your CFO is trying to limit cost, right? So there's always competing perspectives on what the right thing to do in an organization is. And those are some of the friction points to alignment. So I think you start with beginning with the end in mind. What are you solving for? Or do we agree we're solving for this, or do we agree this is an issue in the business right now? And once you can get alignment on that, well, then you can talk about, what are the ways, kind of if you think about that as the what and the why. We have this problem, and this is what it is. What's the who and the how of how we could solve that problem? And we can brainstorm those ideas. And then, one of them, of course, is the idea you're suggesting. In our case, it was standing up a RevOps function. And oftentimes I found once people are aligned on that, they kind of they soften once they say, okay, that's fair. We're all going toward a common goal. The other thing I found is, humans are not flawless. And so right or wrong, to document those discussions, because what will happen is industrial somebody, well, I don't remember you saying it was going to cost that much in year one, or I don't remember you saying you needed that resource, or I don't remember agreeing to that. And so you discuss, you decide, and then you document. I don't care if it's a decision as large as standing up a function or as small as where are we all going to go to dinner. It's that could be an email thread, but the point is you discuss it, you decide it, and then you document it. So when that amnesia kicks in, you can refer back to the conversation. And that's another good foundation for alignment is no, if you'll remember, here's what we discussed, then here's what we decided. And here's the documentation of that decision and how we agreed to go forward. And so it keeps everybody kind of rowing in the same direction, to use the analogy there. I think in terms of what it looked like, I'd say it's planning, right? You plan for alignment, you execute, you achieve the results. That's what alignment is. And then this is how I know I was aligned. Because we all had a plan, we executed the plan, and we got the result from the plan. Versus I got a result over here. It's kind of like sailing. If you're a couple degrees off course, it doesn't seem like a big deal. But over time, you're going to find yourself way off course. And that's where those inspect what you expect and all that kind of loops back in to make sure, hey, are we still all working on the same thing? Are we still doing it the same way? Are we still heading in the same direction? I've also seen this a lot with product features, how they're supposed to work, what the customer or partner wants to do with them. And by the time it starts up here as, a customer request and gets through requirements and then into engineering and then into QA and all that, sometimes it's changed a good bit from what you were starting with. So making sure you have that alignment, you documented it, but then making sure you check in to stay aligned, I think is kind of how you achieve those outcomes, whether it's the success of standing up a function or anything else.
I really like what you said. I think one of the keys there was, and this is hard to think about, but it's like not everybody has the same objective through their perspective. And you said some variation of that, right? But it's like we all have different perspectives. Generally, hopefully, people have at least the heart. The heart is like best interest of the company, but the definition of that heart maybe is a little bit different based on their perspective and potentially limited perspectives. I think perspectives that we talk a lot about. When you think about like some pivotal moments here, it doesn't have to be when you and I work together. Like, I'm gonna throw a little like thing at you here, but like, can you talk maybe about a time where you look back and you're like, that was a really hard challenge to get consensus on, and we maybe took a little bit of because I think like you even talk about documentation. Documentation slows you down in the short term, and that for high achievers and people and companies that are moving quickly, that's a hard thing. Can you maybe give an example of a time where you felt like, you know, you had to lead through that tension of different perspectives, and how you ended up driving at a consensus and outcome behind it.
I would say anytime you're um, trying to move forward or rebrand a company, you're going to find that type of operating environment. Um, People think organically that they've got a lot of opinions on marketing. They're not always informed, but they have them, and they tend to oversimplify what it takes to do things in branding and in marketing. And so it has a strong gravitational pull toward the subjective, but proper branding, like many other things, is actually data and science behind the art of marketing and branding. And so you get to colors and logos and all that last. You do a lot of upfront work around purpose and mission and vision and who are you and why are you unique in the marketplace and all those kinds of things first. And so when you're doing something like that, number one, you're going to have a lot of stakeholder input. Certainly, any organization that has come together through acquisition will have all of their heritage acquisition perspectives. You will have a C suite who all have different levels of experience and opinion about your current situation. And then you'll have a board of directors. And so when you're working on something as large as a company's brand, it's not something you're going to do without having to run it by multiple times your board of directors. And so you have to think about those stakeholders kind of in that way. And that's how I think about some of the largest decisions I've ever made in my career, but certainly in the chief growth officer role is you have people above you, you have people beside you, and you have people below you. And you're trying to bring them all on this journey. So let's say in this case, it's the brand change. So the people below you, the people above you, they like the idea of having one throat to choke for the project, which is also why it's good to have end to end under one person. And they view everything as like you. A great example was pipeline. There's no marketing pipeline, sales pipeline. There's the pipeline. And so you're the person who's going to answer to that. You're the person who's going to answer to branding. And so you have to answer all of those questions. You have to take them on the journey of why you have to do it. How much will it cost? What is the time frame? What should we expect the benefit to be? How long to realize that benefit? So it's almost like a business case for doing something like that, because of course there's significant expense to it. Then you have the people beside you who are also impacted by something like that and have to be brought along. If you're in tech or software, even hardware, you could have the UI, you could have packaging, you could have support documents, you could have websites, you could have stickers on machines. It doesn't matter. You have to consider all of those things. And so they become a huge stakeholder group to align and get on board and answer questions and get their buy-in. And then you have everybody below you who you're trying to get to row in the same direction and buy into this new brand, see themselves in it, see themselves as connected to it, and like it better than what their heritage state is. And so that's a project for sure, where I had to apply all of what we've just talked about at those three different levels, above, beside, and below, to get to some sort of new promised land. And it took the better of 2 quarters plus to do it, and then finally launch it. We were up against the deadline because it was tied to the launch of our platform. And so those two things kind of had to pop out the tube at the same time. But it required a lot of stakeholder management, which is where the getting the bill through Congress came from.
You hinted at this, and I love this example you threw in there, which was pipeline. I think, when we talk about the chief growth officer role, it's the thing that I've seen. One of the most common things I deal with a lot of times is I always get put in the middle of it, right? And it's, the CEO inevitably comes down and says, "Oh, pipeline's not looking good." I know you've never seen this happen before. And, typically you've got, your sales leader pointing fingers one way, and you've got your marketing leader pointing finger the other way. And I think one of the coolest things that I think worked really well is from exactly what you said, where it was like that you only could point one direction, and that was at yourself. And ultimately, which really forced you to have to make the best decisions around it. And it wasn't, that's a them problem. That's a us. I think one of the things you would always say is like, we attack problems, not people. It's one of the other
Yes.
sayings you say a lot. I've always admired that leadership mentality. It's a brain shift, and it's funny. I still use that a lot today. Of like, okay, how am I attacking problems, not people, in this example? It's a check balance for me. But I think it's a great example that you gave of just a the power of alignment, exactly what you're talking about, but b also just where I think that chief growth officer role really. It's a great example of how that can play out and be powerful for an organization because it creates, to your point, 100% alignment across the org.
You touched on tension. There will always be tension in an organization. And frankly, I think that's natural and healthy. It could be among teams, marketing and sales. It could be among full stack. So, for example, if I think or I'm getting data, even firsthand experience, that there's aspects of our product that are causing friction with customers, well, there's nothing in the chief growth team that's going to solve that. Right. So I'm going to head over to my colleague, friend, and peer, and I'm going to say, hey, I'm getting perspective about this, this, and this. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? Should, maybe get on the horn with me with that customer or that prospect or that partner. Let's go make a visit. Let's learn more about that. And our head of product, to her credit, would frequently hit the road with me in good situations and challenging situations to figure those things out. And so I think tension, anybody who wants a tension-free environment, I'm not sure you're going to ever find that, nor do I think that's necessarily good. I think it's balancing when the tension is healthy and when it's not. And so healthy tension to me leads to accountability, self-discipline and accountability. I know what the expectations are. I know everybody around me is pulling their weight, so I'm going to hold myself accountable to do that too. Because if I don't, I know I have people around me who are going to hold me accountable. And then there's the unhealthy tension you talked about, which is the finger pointing, right? The blamefulness, that gets nobody anywhere, especially in an escalated situation. And so that's kind of tension that there's really no room for, because you have to have high leadership maturity. It's what I mean about not assuming all leaders start at the same starting point. You have to have high leadership maturity to take it out of the personal and into the problem. What is the issue here, and how can we solve it to the betterment of the company, the team, the customer, whatever it is. And I think the other thing is all the groups have to be operating that way. So if you're operating at high maturity, but the other groups aren't, that's where you'll also see some of that tension bubble up, and it has to be kind of worked through at the executive level to agree how you want to operate going forward.
One of the things that you're hinting at here, and I'd like to shift a little bit to, is the people side of it, because I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, we can have all of these great principles and cultural things that we're trying to lead through, but if you don't have the right people, right people on the bus, I think you've used that analogy before, you're not going to get there. So can you talk a little bit, especially at the executive level, and you're hiring out other executives as well, or
Mhm.
even some director level, but can you talk a little bit about what are some of those attributes and things that you're looking for when making those key hires for your organization?
So again, people for me is the number one pillar. And so I think there's things you'll get on paper, and things you won't. Usually by the time somebody gets to me, unless it's a direct report kind of thing, they've been through a number of people already. But I would say let's do it on paper, off paper. On paper, it's the obvious stuff, starting with skills, experience, knowledge, maybe, I want to see a results orientation, kind of a pattern of delivering against results, outcomes, that kind of stuff. Maybe industry experience if you're in a certain industry or sector or segment, and then some sort of leadership or management ability. I mean, unless even as an individual contributor, can you self manage? Can you manage the work of other people? Certainly, if you're going to have people under you, very important to me what kind of leader and manager, and those are two different things, you are and you can be. Because we all know, we read it all over the internet, LinkedIn all the time, right? People don't leave companies, they leave a bad boss. And so if you have that situation, then, you can be a force multiplier or a force killer. You can be a culture killer, and then the whole team under you is miserable. You could be the smartest person in your area, but if you're a terrible manager or terrible leader, you're going to have an incredibly adverse effect. So those are kind of the things on paper. Off paper, I'm not looking to see what you know. I'm looking to see who you are. Very big into who you are. What do you do outside of work? What do you like not in the office? What's your integrity and trust level? Because again, I think in a team, high team environment, high performant environment, it's like special ops or the Navy SEALs or any of those analogies you want to use. Any pro sports team, you trust that the other person is doing what they said they're going to do. And so it has to have a high integrity, trust, say do ratio. Are you that kind of person? Or are you yeah, and then you go off and forget about it or take forever to do it or, something like that. So I think that's a huge one. I think you want to be an impact player. I like to work with people who are impact players. You certainly were knocked that out of the proverbial park. You have to want to make a real difference, not just, clock in, clock out. And I'm not saying time is a badge of honor, a 12-hour day. That's actually unhealthy. It's the impact that you're making in your team, in your function, in your company, in the world. Are you a person who likes to leave a legacy? Are you switched on? Are you hands on? So I look for people that demonstrate that. I look for confidence. I look for, you taught me, candor is a good one. I don't want a bunch of yes people. If we're about to make a mistake, I'd like somebody to professionally and respectfully raise their hand and say, I understand why you might think that's a good idea. I don't. Here's why. That is somebody who's a multiplier on a team because you're just going for the best outcome. You've left your ego and your personal agenda at the door. So team orientation, communication skills, things like that. But those are kind of the handful of things I think really make a stellar addition to any team at any level of the organization.
I think you highlighted what I really liked that you focused on again was kind of who you are outside. Because I always say this, like, work is our biggest time commitment. Like, and I don't know why we don't always think through that, but the more you think about that, it puts it a little bit in perspective of like, you should generally enjoy the people you work with. Even if like work,
Ideally,
I think you and I love working. Like that's
yes,
genuinely, we actually enjoy working. That's not everybody,
we
and that's
do.
okay. We don't actually need everybody to love working the way we do. But I would think at least if you can, and if you have the luxury and capability to actually want to enjoy the people you work with, and I think that's really fun. And it's not just like we have the same common sports, it's not like that
Mhm.
thing, but it's more of like kind of to your point around integrity and some of these other just perspectives and views on life in general. I think makes a huge impact.
I read something the other day. I have not done the backwards math on it, so take that with a grain of salt. But that in your career, you spend about 90,000 hours working.
Yeah.
And so, to your point, who are you in the trenches with? It's one of the things I look for in a new opportunity. Who am I going to be working with to get this done? And that's a big thing because we've heard all the stories and wars and sporting events and everything else of the little mighty team that achieved the big thing, whether it was holding off the enemy or you know making up from a 10-run deficit or a 20-point deficit, whatever sport you like. That all comes through grit and teamwork and the kind of people they are. And so it really does make a difference.
Hiring is hard. It's hard to find good people, but man, it's worth it when you do. It makes a huge difference. Last
Yeah.
question. I'm really curious, as you think about your journey and where you've gotten to today and even where you're headed, like what's something that you're energized, excited by? Like are there any areas right now you're just like, man, I'm really either curious how this plays out or I'm really passionate about this. Do you have anything you want to share with us around that?
I think several things are going to happen. The first one is going to be the type of leader that succeeds in a go forward organization is going to evolve. If you think about multi generational workplaces, and I think oldest people in workplaces now would be considered part of the boomer generation. Then you have X, then you have millennial, et cetera. I think then you have zennials. So my point is how multi-generational leadership and management is going to rapidly evolve. It has to. I think the second is AI. And I know it might sound trite because everybody talks about AI, But I think there's two dimensions to AI people need to think about. The first is the one everybody talks about, which is the practical applications inside of any type of organization, whether that's for efficiency, whether that's to unlock new insights in white space, automate processes to reduce the need for headcount. I think those are somewhat straightforward. But to double click on the reduction of headcount, what that also means is if we assume that AI is going to continue to get smarter and more effective in its purpose and application at the rate that it is, say over the next even 5 years, what will the impact be economically to unemployment? So if we are able to automate, because first it was generative AI and large language models, generative AI, now you're into agentic AI. If you're able to do that, which by the way we reward profit in at least in our capitalistic country here, then that's what you're supposed to do as a company. The other side of that coin, though, is going to be what happens to the people that it replaces, and the answer should be CEOs and boards of directors should be thinking about reskilling. But I don't think they are. I think most of them are thinking about letting people go. And so while that might give you a short-term pickup in terms of profitability or something like that, what it's also going to do is it's going to end up driving unemployment back into the double digits. And is our economy and the landscape of business worldwide prepared for that? And so that's where I think companies that focus on reskilling and retraining and even pockets of organizational development inside of organizations and looking out ahead of that trend, doing it in concert. If I'm applying AI to a function, am I also thinking about how I can reskill and redeploy the human capital is going to be an important balance for leaders. So I'm excited about it. And at the same time, I'm very intellectually curious about it and trying to formulate where I think that's going to go myself.
I've actually I've never actually heard anybody say anything about the reskilling aspect, which now you say it, I'm like, well, that seems like a no-brainer, but it is an interesting one. I've never thought about it. I haven't heard anybody say it. So I think, you've kind of got the short, medium, and long-term tail of AI, and I think we can all speculate where the long-term lies, but I think definitely in that medium term, uh, I mean, that's a huge asset because back to our point a second ago around people and, what you're looking for in your hiring, if you've done a good job hiring good people, a good is defined, as you said, in two different ways. It's like what's on paper, which is really your skill set. And two, and I would say more importantly, is what's not on paper. If you've done a good job hiring what's not on paper and having that framework of people, and you have the ability to change that skill set, man, that's impactful. So anyways, I love that. I haven't heard that one at all.
Well, if you think about the proverbial paper, right, the resume or the LinkedIn profile, all it really tells me is what you've done.
Oh,
It doesn't tell me what you're going to do
can do.
or your capacity or manner in which you're going to do it. That's who you are and how you are. And that's what we want to make sure we also equally uncover, not just your capacity and competency, but what kind of player are you? And do we want you on the team? And so that's kind of the human skills, the who you are, that I think it's also important to spend some time on.
Well, and as you said, people are the differentiator, right? And if we truly believe that, it's not just a talking head point, but there's a
Mm-mm.
belief behind it, then I think you're exactly right. I mean, we've done all this work to find great people and great again defining exactly as you said. Why not put that other effort on our end to upskill and reskill? I love that. It's a great point. Thank you for joining. This is fun as always. Good talking with you. Those of you who are listening, if you aren't following Sue on LinkedIn, that's probably best platform to find her on. Please like and follow. And then those of you who haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do. And again, Sue, thank you so much for taking the time today.